Hello, welcome. I'm Masood Raja, and this is Raja Against the Machine. And today I'll briefly talk about the Republican strategy of voter suppression. Now, so many times we talk about it, but we usually posit it as an irrational and racist attempt, but there is deep pragmatic anxiety behind it. Now, we all know that the Republican Party, despite the warnings from the insiders, has refused to change in a way that it can incorporate more and more of the minorities into its project, right? So the only way they can sustain themselves as a political party is through gerrymandering and by suppressing the minority vote. And the figures are pretty clear as to how the vote breaks down. Let's take a look at it from the 2018 elections, and then we can talk about it a little more. So according to Pew Research Center, here were some of the figures in the 2018 elections, right, as to how minorities voted. So African Americans voted 90% for Democrats, Hispanics 69%, and Asians 77%. The population breakdown is white 60% and minorities 40%. So as you saw, that majority of the bulk of the minority vote is going to Democrats. And it's not that the minorities are stupid, it's because the Democratic platform absolutely suits their priorities, regardless of whether they're African American, Hispanic, or generally in the Asian category. Now that means that the Caucasian vote is still 60% of the population. Now that also has an interesting breakdown. If you look at the college-educated voting in the 2018 election, according to Pew Research Center, 59% of women voted Democrat and 47% of men voted Democrats. So what then leaves for the Republican Party, especially the presidential candidates, right, is this thin slice of white female vote and a huge chunk of the non-college educated white vote, right? But they cannot break that 90% of African American vote or 69% of Hispanic vote because they have not shown any policies or any statements, public or other, in which they can attract enough of African American vote to break that 90% figure, right? Nor are they willing to change their party, right? Increasingly, the party is moving more towards right, and increasingly it is openly becoming more and more racist, as led by Mr. Trump and his enablers. So what do, right? They legislate to restrict voting, right? They make the identity rules, the voter identity rules, more stringent. They make sure that there are laws that put people off the voting rolls. And then there are, of course, illegal means of suppressing the votes. There is disinformation, right? All of these strategies then are geared towards making sure that less and less of minorities can vote or less of them show up for vote. These are defeatist strategies, right? And these are kind of police state strategies. But on state level, then depending on which state you are, then there are different ways of suppressing the minority vote. And the reason that they have to do it is because their politics is politics of the past. It's the politics of an idealized America that never existed, and now increasingly it's politics of race. And they are working with that thin slice of conservative white vote. And they have no clue or no idea or no strategy to expand their voter base, right? And hence, if we think in these terms, if we think in numbers, and think that those numbers go against the future of Republican Party, and that the Republican Party is not willing to change itself, even though after the 2016 election, after the second Obama election, there was a huge report that was published by RNC in which the recommendations to reach minority voters were there. No one followed them. Now with Trump in office and all his followers, in the cities and villages or towns, and his enablers in Washington, D.C. and in the Senate, in the last 3 years, there is not a single thing that the Republican Party has done to make itself more attractive to minorities, right? So what they are left with is these legal, quasi-legal, and sometimes illegal ways of suppressing the minority vote. And I think this is what we should keep in mind whenever we fight against it, or whenever we raise our voice against it, or whenever we are trying to talk to some Republican who's trying to tell us that everything is fair in America. It is not, right? And these numbers are a reason for that. That's all for today. If you have any comments or questions, please send them my way. And thank you so much for joining me here, and I will now see you next time. Until then, peace and love.